For the first time, our research has also focused on something which is obviously very topical these days, which is gender diversity. And it's interesting to note that our report highlights that of the Indian companies that we were able to research, 19% have women on their board. And if we compare that to the UK statistic for FTSE 350, which stands at, I think it's 29%, obviously it compares unfavorably, but if you compare with the Nifty 500 in India, where it is in fact 14%, so actually the 19% bodes very well compared to the 14%. Moving on very quickly to the actual tracker which tracks the fastest growing Indian companies. So all of you here in this room are in here because you have grown by more than 10% per our research. But what is amazing is that we have a record number of 87 companies that actually have achieved a turnover growth of more than 10%. And if you look at the average growth rate, that's 44% compared to last year when it was 31% average. So that's quite commendable given the economic climate that we're in today. And what's interesting is, well, is that 1/3 of the companies that are on the list this year were actually on the list last year. And what's even more amazing is that there are 4 companies that have been on the list every single year since we've had this report. And I think it's worth naming them, and I think they're all in this room. So there's Accord Healthcare, there's Glenmark, Mill Farm, and Secure Meters. And I think they all deserve a round of applause. I think sector-wise, technology and telecoms continues to dominate the tracker on the list, with 23% of the companies being in the technology and telecom sector, with pharmaceuticals and chemicals, which again is the second largest sector, with closely following with 18%. But what's interesting this year is that we've got engineering and manufacturing has also matched the pharmaceutical percentage of 18%, which I think demonstrates the diverseness of the sectors that Indian corporates are in terms of the UK contribution to the UK economy. Geographically, the spread, what's interesting here is that London has actually dominated the position. So now over half, 54% of the fastest growing companies are actually from London. So I don't know, we were going to have the Deputy Mayor for Business here, but unfortunately had to go to another event, but I think he'd be very proud to know that 54% of the fastest growing Indian companies are actually in London. Having said that, what's interesting to note is that the North and Midlands are catching up quite fast, and we know from recent initiatives, both in Manchester and in other parts of the North, that actually we may see a very different figure in the coming years. Employment-wise, it's been fairly stable in the fact that we've got 105,000 people employed by Indian companies, of which more than 80% are from 13 companies. Some of them are present here today, including HCL and Tech Mahindra and Intas as well. As suggested in last year's report, the Brexit uncertainties have had a limited impact on the Indian appetite for investment in the UK. And there's really been no mass exodus that was sort of anticipated or feared at the time of the Brexit. In fact, what's interesting, in the contrary, that if you look at the M&A activity, 4 of the 10 largest European acquisitions by Indian companies were in the UK. And what's even more interesting is that the capital expenditure by existing Indian companies, that is companies that are already here, totals 4.7 billion as compared to 4.25 billion, which was in last year's. And that's all I have to say in terms of the highlights. The report will be available to you for you to have a read of, and we'll be distributing that soon after the awards ceremony. So it now gives me my great pleasure to ask the High Commissioner, His Excellency Sina to come to the podium to formally launch the report. And if I could ask my colleague Mark Byers, the member of the senior leadership team from Grant Thornton and the head of international, to join him, as well as Suchita Sonalaki from the CII to also be on stage, so that we can formally launch this 2018 Grant Thornton CII report.